Welcome, Wargamers, to the squat yet godlike Mortal Realms. Today we're talking all about Grungni, specifically as he was depicted in the Broken Realms series leading into Age of Sigmar 3rd Edition. Now, for those of you who are new to the Age of Sigmar setting, there are two known gods of the Duarden, or dwarves if you will, and those are Grungni and Grimnir. Grimnir got himself exploded in the Age of Myth. I have an entire Fire Slayer series if you want to learn more about that, but the other god, Grungni, has a bit of a different path to him. Chaman, the realm of metal, seems to be what Grungni is all about. He is a god of crafting and industry and engineering, smithing and technology. At one point, the Duarden, or dwarves, who would one day become the Gregorian overlords, were kind of like his prized children. He taught them all kinds of things about metallurgy and technology and crafting, even going so far as, right at the tail end of the Age of Myth, discovering the secret of flight. And once, Grungni had given all these gifts and this knowledge onto his children, he, somewhat rightfully, felt that there came a time where they needed to stand on their own 2 feet, to proudly, be the Duarden children that he wanted, to craft their own world. Which is quite noble, honestly, because you wouldn't want, the gods, being in the nitty-gritty of every single day of your life, but here's the problem. He chose to, kick the baby birds out of the nest right when the Age of Chaos began. And I'm just going to say, that's a bad move. Because as the world is falling apart around them, particularly in Chaman with the forces of Tzeentch just absolutely corrupting and destroying everything around them, these Duarden were praying, but nobody was answering. When their cities fell, and their holds, and their, deep mountain dwellings, and all those traditional classic, dwarven things started to collapse, he was not answering his children. And if you're curious, this is actually one of the main reasons that the Gregorian overlords are not religious at all. They understand that the gods exist, but what good is a god that abandoned his people in their darkest hour? And so, just like they perceived Grungni rejecting them, the Gregorian overlords reject Grungni. No gods, no kings, only business and commerce. Now, truth be told, we don't have a fantastic description of what Grungni was doing at that point in the Age of Chaos. I really do hope that they expand upon that in the future. We know soon afterwards, once the Gates of Azyr were shut, he began working with Sigmar on his Stormcast Eternal project, which we'll get here in a second. But there's not really a clear indication of why he was so unavailable to his people when everything was falling apart. But we do know that he has some stuff going on in the background that maybe the others don't know about. If you've ever read the book Spear of Shadows, which is a fantastic Age of Sigmar novel, I highly recommend. He features very prominently as a character in that story, and his description and kind of the sense you get of him working in the background with special artifacts and that kind of thing, it gives you a really great sense of who he is. So we know he was doing things, we just don't know what they were. But during the Age of Chaos, he was, again, contributing, like I said, working closely with Sigmar to build and design these first wave of Stormcast Eternals. Now, what did, the engineering god bring to this equation? Well, essentially, he was able to bind the pure power of Azyr, like the realm, to a mortal soul, marking it as Sigmar's and giving them a semi-eternal life. In this way, they can die on the battlefield, but before their souls are claimed by the afterlife, they arc back to Azyr to be reforged. He was key in designing the Anvil of Apotheosis, where souls are taken and literally hard-pressed into new forms, given a new body and a new purpose. We also know that he did a little bit in terms of figuring out the technological problem of how do you mine malice. If you don't know, the core of the old world is called malice. It's just this big rock that hangs in the skies of Azyr, and basically Grungni helped figure out, okay, we're going to mine this, and that's where Sigmarite comes from, which is what all Stormcast Eternals are made of. At least their armor, anyway. And what we know going into 3rd edition is that he's now working with Sigmar again, and he essentially created a new form of armor, Thunderstrike armor, that can retrieve souls back to Azyr despite the open wound of chaos that Be'lakor set loose in Broken Realms Be'lakor. If you didn't catch that coverage, Very briefly, Be'lakor set off a chain reaction of realm gates exploding, and it created like a huge rift that allowed like this cloud of chaos to kind of sweep over the realms. It started in Chamon, but it's spreading other places as well. And so what it does is it basically makes it impossible for most Stormcast to arc back to Azir. He essentially created a special kind of armor that surpasses that. All in all, the vision we have for him right now is that he's an extremely hard-working ally of the Pantheon of Order in whatever context that looked like. Even when the Pantheon was falling apart during the Age of Chaos, he still stuck by Sigmar, so he is loyal, if nothing else. And he's a fantastic ally to have because he's constantly seeing, what the realms are like and creating, he kind of sees it as challenges that can be overcome with artifacts of power or weapons or technology. He's a problem solver. But at the same time, he bears a great deal of shame for how he handled his people during the Age of Chaos. And I think partially because of that, he prefers to work in the shadows. He's a backstage professional. He's not a god that you're often going to see on the front lines of combat. He wants to be toiling in his workshop, coming out with, solutions to sweeping massive problems. But we know there's a bit more going on because the Broken Realm series has had some choice cameos with him in it, and it was only when the core book for 3rd edition came out that he specifically name-dropped. There was a bit of a debate about who was being represented in the story. It is now confirmed that it was Grungni. So let's break that down a little bit. The first example, and probably the most prominent, is at the end of Broken Realms Be'lakor, the big man himself, Be'lakor, is attacking a Kharadron Overlord ship. He's just hacking and slashing at it with his hands, and as he's crawling around the sides of it, he looks on the deck and he sees a Duarden that's a bit taller than the others that are standing around him, kind of decked out like an Arcanaut dude. And at seeing him, Be'lakor freezes, kind of thinks for a second, and then lets go of the ship and sounds the retreat without protest. Now, some have said that this person, this spirit, was Grombrindle. The 3rd edition core book says very clearly it was Grungni. And I have to say, I love the fact that it was him, because I think in this way, Grungni is reaching out to his children. They are the way they are because of him, because of his choices that pushed them away, that pushed them during the Age of Chaos into this world of cutthroat business and survivalism. If you watched my coverage of that series, Be'lakor had set loose that warp storm, that cloud I was talking about earlier, and while it did affect the Stormcast Eternals, it also affected the Kharadron Overlords in an immense way, because it affected their ether gold veins that were in the sky of Chamon. It moved them, it consumed some of them, which, if you're not sure, the Kharadron Overlords, it's the resource that keeps their cities and ships afloat. So in my mind, Grungni's watching this all unfold, and he is fearing for his children that are very much distant from him, and he swoops in to deliver whatever help he can when they're in the face of what is essentially an extinction-level event. I mean, for them and their way of life, it absolutely is. And so I like to think that it's his way of trying to be there in a form that they would accept, or at least they could not refuse, right? All he does is stand on the deck of a ship. He is a god standing before one, albeit powerful, demon. Be'lakor sees him, he knows this battle has just escalated, and so he releases the ship and retreats. And I love that he has that arc, or at least they're laying the groundwork for it, because I get the sense that he's trying to make up for the sins of the past, but only being allowed to do so much, because the Kharadron Overlords are so opposed to gods of any kind. Never mind him, never mind the one that actively rejected them in their time of need. At least from their perspective. He also appears again at the tail end of Broken Realms Kragnos in a completely different scene. Morathi is giving an account of herself on her actions with taking Anvilgard. Her and the Celestant Prime are about to come to blows, which, I don't know how that guy, Celestant Prime, thought he was going to win that fight, whatever. And then Grungni comes in and intervenes, basically saying, this is not the time. Everybody, the crap has just hit the ether fan, which isn't a unique position to have. I'm just surprised that he was the one to say it. These are dwarves, right? That stuff goes down in the Book of Grudges if someone takes your city, but he's here nah, this is so much bigger than that. Right? Can you imagine a dwarf from the old world being like, you took my city? Well, fine then. I hope you enjoy it and we continue to be allies. And that's exactly what he said here. Like, no way. They go straight to the Book of Grudges. But again, I think he's just working in the background, and he is seeing, as an engineer, someone who's trying to solve all these problems that have been created by Be'lakor and Kragnos and all those things. He's seeing a much, much bigger picture. And then chronologically, it would be right after this that he went and designed the Thunderstrike armor that the new Stormcast Eternals have. So let's talk about why I think Grungni, in the context of going into 3rd edition, is so cool. Like, what's the point of this video? I'll be honest, I don't have a core message for this. I just wanted to talk about what could be one of Games Workshop's best written heroes. The more I learn about him, the more I want to learn. His physical description in Spear of Shadows is incredible. Like, beard like living smoke, eyes like they were pulled from the forge, like hot radiant coals. His voice sounds like hammers slamming on iron, like it's blunt and intense. And the whole book is about a plan that he has going on in the background. I'm not going to spoil it at all, but it's really great. We know that he bears an immense amount of guilt over what are now the Kharadron overlords, and I love that for 2 reasons. It's a great counterpoint to Teclis and the Deepkin, where there's just no regrets, no regrets. He's just a bad dad and they're bad kids, and that's just all there is to it. Right, Teclis is over there like, oh, you want me to be responsible for these children that I made? Show me the paternity suit papers or go away. He just wants nothing to do with it. Whereas Grungni is there for them in any way that they'll accept it. He's trying to find an in. But in a way, it also reminds me of Alarielle, right? She fell into a true despair during the Age of Chaos, and as a being who embodies seasons of life and stuff, she took a very literal change. But for Grungni, what does that same level of sorrow look like? Well, it probably looks like a god becoming reclusive, isolating himself with what he knows best, in his comfort zone, the Forge. Working hard to help others as best he can because he wasn't able to when it mattered most. So yeah, that's why he was, in my mind, that's why he was in Azir, hammering away at building the Stormcast, because he just was broken. And for that reason, it's why I try to point out every scene that he is in. Now, as far as wishlisting, now we're standing on the precipice of 3rd edition with Dominion box being dropped. As far as what I want in the future, a lot of folks have been asking when I've done live shows and stuff, hey, is there any reference that KO, Kharadron Overlords, and the Fire Slayers are going to be merged together into one, like, Duardin book? Honestly, in the core book, it's not really the place that they would kind of show that. From what I can tell in there, it's just they're 2 separate factions. I don't really think they go together, to be perfectly honest with you, but I do think Grungni needs to have a more active role in the realms. I don't need a model for him, I don't necessarily need a completely different faction, but he's already proven in the Broken Realm series alone to be a mover and a shaker, that he's willing to go places, to draw a line and be like, Be'lakor, stop. And he stops. And so, like, that's a huge thing. So I want to see more of him, absolutely. Something I could very easily see is a small faction that's like Automata or something like that. Something where there's, he uses this craftsmanship and engineering on full display, and there might be mortals in there that wield these weapons or whatever, but for the most part, it's going to be largely mechanics. But anyway, friends, I just wanted to have a brief talk about that because his cameos in the Broken Realm series really got me thinking. I really enjoyed seeing him pop up in the story, particularly in the big battle at the end of Broken Realm's Be'lakor, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Like, do you want the Fire Slayers and KO to be merged into one book, first of all? And secondly, if not, what army do you think he would wield? And if you don't want that, what do you want him to do in the background of the lore? For me, I wouldn't mind if, minimum, he just kind of kept inventing really cool stuff for the Stormcast. I would not even care if that was all he did. But I love just seeing him be active. I want the Duardin gods to be more active. I want Grimnir to come back. Again, doesn't need a model. I just want him there. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.